Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is eating nutmeg. Someone is buying pepper. Someone is cooking with cloves. For 1,000 years those spices were worth more than gold. Wars were fought for them. Empires were built chasing them. The Europeans who finally found the source called it the discovery of the century. But there was already an empire there. The largest empire in Southeast Asian history. An empire that controlled every spice route, every sea lane, every island from Sumatra to New Guinea. An empire that most people have never heard of. What happened to the Majapahit Empire? The chronicler described the capital.
Traian is a city of 100,000 people. Its avenues are wide enough for 10 elephants to walk abreast. Its temples rise above the jungle canopy. Its markets sell goods from China, India, Arabia, and every island in the sea. No city in Southeast Asia has ever been its equal.
The Majapahit Navy controlled the Strait of Malacca, the most important waterway in the world. Every ship carrying spices from the Maluku Islands to China or India passed through waters that Majapahit controlled. The empire did not just grow spices. It taxed every spice that moved. The chronicler examined the royal treasury.
The goldsmiths of Majapahit produce work that no craftsman in Asia can equal. The king wears gold that tells stories in its patterns. Each piece is a text. Each jewel is a sentence. The treasury is a library written in metal.
At its peak the Majapahit Empire controlled an archipelago of over 10,000 islands. Modern Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, and parts of the Philippines and Thailand all fell within its sphere of influence. It was the largest empire in Southeast Asian history. The Europeans who arrived 2 centuries later found its ghost still haunting every port. Chinese diplomats who visited Majapahit wrote home in disbelief at what they found. Prime Minister Gajah Mada responded to such praise with characteristic directness.
Let them be amazed. We have not finished yet. The archipelago has not yet been unified. Every island that still stands apart from Majapahit is an insult to what this empire can become. I will not rest until the last island bends its knee.
The Majapahit left behind stone temples of extraordinary beauty. Their relief carvings tell the stories of Hindu epics translated into a distinctly Javanese world. The warriors wear Javanese clothes. The gods eat Javanese food. They did not copy India. They absorbed India and made it their own. Today Indonesia uses the word Nusantara to describe its archipelago nation. That word comes from a Majapahit oath sworn 600 years ago. The national symbol of Indonesia is the Garuda, the golden eagle of Majapahit. The largest Muslim nation on earth was built on the bones of a Hindu empire that most of its citizens know only as legend. The story of Majapahit begins with one of the most audacious acts of political treachery in history. In 1293, Kublai Khan sent a massive fleet to punish the king of Java for insulting his ambassador. The Javanese king had branded the ambassador's face. The Mongols were coming to burn Java to the ground. The chronicler described what happened next.
A young prince named Raden Wijaya approached the Mongol commanders not as an enemy, but as an ally. He offered to guide their fleet against his own rival who had taken his throne. The Mongols trusted him. They followed him inland. They destroyed his enemy for him. Then he turned on them.
Once the Mongols had done his work for him, Raden Wijaya attacked. He knew the jungle. The Mongols did not. The Mongol army that had conquered China and Persia was cut to pieces by a prince they thought was their guide. Raden Wijaya put it simply.
I did not fight the Mongols. I used the Mongols. There is a difference. The man who uses his enemy's strength against him needs no strength of his own. He only needs patience and a clear mind.
The Mongol fleet retreated. Kublai Khan never sent another expedition to Java. Raden Wijaya founded his new kingdom at a place called Majapahit, named after a bitter fruit that grew there. The bitter fruit would become an empire. The chronicler described the founding years.
Raden Wijaya builds carefully. He does not rush. He does not overreach. He secures each piece of territory before moving to the next. He rewards loyalty generously and punishes betrayal absolutely. He is building something that is meant to last.
The Majapahit court blended Hindu and Buddhist traditions into a uniquely Javanese synthesis. Sanskrit was the language of religion and literature. Javanese was the language of government and poetry. The court supported poets, musicians, architects, and scholars. The Nagara Kritagama, a court poem written in 1365, is one of the masterpieces of Southeast Asian literature. Trade made Majapahit the center of Asia's commercial world. Chinese merchants came for pepper and gold. Indian merchants came for sandalwood and tin. Arab merchants came for nutmeg and cloves. Javanese merchants went everywhere. The empire sat at the intersection of every trade route between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. The volcanic soil of Java was the most fertile agricultural land in Southeast Asia. The Majapahit fed their million-person capital with rice paddies of extraordinary productivity. Java's agriculture was so reliable that it freed enormous resources for trade, warfare, and culture. An empire that does not worry about food can worry about everything else. In 1319 a rebel general named Kuti seized control of the Majapahit palace. The young king Jayanagara fled for his life. His bodyguard unit, the Byankara, stayed loyal. Their commander was a man named Gajah Mada. He was about to change the history of Southeast Asia. The chronicler described Gajah Mada's strategy.
Gajah Mada does not have enough men to fight Kuti directly, so he does not fight Kuti directly. He spreads a rumor that the king is dead. Kuti's supporters begin to quarrel over the succession. While they quarrel, Gajah Mada strikes. The rebel is dead within days. The king is restored. Gajah Mada is now the most powerful man in Majapahit.
Gajah Mada rose to become Mahapati, the prime minister of Majapahit. He was the most powerful commoner in the history of Southeast Asia. At his inauguration ceremony he made an oath that has echoed through Southeast Asian history for 700 years.
I will not taste the spices of the realm. I will not eat pepper or salt or any condiment of pleasure until every territory of the Nusantara has submitted to Majapahit. Not one island shall remain outside. Not one port shall trade without our permission. Not one king shall wear a crown without our blessing. This I swear. This I will fulfill.
Gajah Mada spent the next 30 years fulfilling his oath. He conquered Bali. He brought Borneo to heel. He extended Majapahit's reach to Sulawesi, the Maluku Spice Islands, and the coasts of the Malay Peninsula. He was systematic, patient, and utterly without mercy for those who resisted. The chronicler described the military machine.
Gajah Mada understands that this empire is built on sea power. The islands cannot be held by land armies alone. He has built the greatest navy in Southeast Asia. His warships are faster and larger than anything that sails these waters. Every island kingdom that sees his fleet on the horizon sends tribute before the ships even anchor.
By the 1350s Gajah Mada had fulfilled the Palapa oath. The entire Nusantara was under Majapahit authority. Trade revenue poured into Traulan. The capital was expanded. The temples were built. The poets were patronized. The empire reached its absolute peak. Then Gajah Mada made a mistake that began its unraveling. In 1357 a Sundanese princess came to Triulan to marry the king. Gajah Mada demanded that the Sundanese present her as a vassal tribute rather than as an equal royal bride. The Sundanese refused. Fighting broke out. The princess and her entire escort were massacred. The king was furious. Gajah Mada was removed from power. The Sunda region never forgave Majapahit. The wound never healed. Gajah Mada died in retirement around 1364. He had built the greatest empire in Southeast Asian history from the position of a prime minister with no royal blood. He had fulfilled an oath most people thought was madness. He had also planted the seeds of the empire's destruction by making an enemy of the Sundanese and overreaching at Bubit. Greatness and recklessness often wear the same face. The reign of King Hayam Wuruk from 1350 to 1389 was the absolute peak of Majapahit civilization. Hayam Wuruk and Gajah Mada together built something the region had never seen. A unified maritime empire with a sophisticated administrative system, a thriving cultural life, and a navy that made the Java Sea a Majapahit lake. The chronicler described the literary achievement.
The court poet Mpu Perpanka has completed his masterwork. The Nagara Kritagama describes the empire in extraordinary detail. Its cities, its ceremonies, its territories, its kings. It is the most important text we have for understanding Majapahit. Without it we would know almost nothing. A single poem preserved a civilization.
Majapahit practiced a form of religious synthesis unique in the medieval world. Hindu and Buddhist traditions were fused into what Javanese called Agama Hindu Dharma. Local animist traditions were incorporated rather than suppressed. The royal family patronized both Shaivite Hindu and Buddhist monasteries simultaneously. King Hayam Wuruk himself was considered a manifestation of both Shiva and Buddha. Wayang shadow puppetry reached its classical form under Majapahit patronage. The Gamelan orchestra that accompanied it became one of the world's great musical traditions. The stories told through wayang, drawn from Hindu epics but reimagined in Javanese terms, are still performed in Indonesia today. Every performance is a thread connecting modern Indonesia to Majapahit. King Hayam Wuruk maintained diplomatic relations with China, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, India, and the kingdoms of the Malay Peninsula simultaneously. The Chinese emperor of the Ming dynasty sent tribute missions to Majapahit. The greatest empire in Asia was paying respect to a Javanese king. King Hayam Wuruk put it plainly.
We do not seek to conquer China. We seek to trade with China. The ocean between us is not a barrier. It is a road, and we control the road.
The spice trade under Majapahit was the most valuable commercial system in the medieval world. Nutmeg and cloves grew only in the Maluku Islands, which Majapahit controlled. A single shipload of nutmeg bought in the Maluku Islands and sold in Europe could make a merchant fabulously wealthy. The entire wealth of the age flowed through Majapahit hands. The chronicler described the craftsmanship.
The batik cloth of Majapahit is unlike anything produced anywhere else in the world. Each pattern carries meaning. Each color tells a story of rank and occasion. A nobleman's robe is a text that anyone who can read cloth can understand. The weavers are artists and scribes simultaneously.
Majapahit engineers built water management systems of extraordinary sophistication. Reservoirs, canals, and drainage channels transformed the landscape of Java into one of the most productive agricultural regions in Asia. The hydraulic engineering that fed Triulan's million people was a marvel that contemporary visitors could not stop describing. When Hayam Wuruk died in 1389, the empire he had built with Gajah Mada began to fracture. He left no clear successor. His son-in-law Wikramawardhana claimed the throne. His illegitimate son Wirabumi refused to accept it. The empire that had conquered 10,000 islands could not conquer its own succession. The chronicler described the Pergreg Civil War.
For 2 years the empire fights itself, the eastern half against the western half. The armies that Gajah Mada built to conquer the archipelago are now destroying each other. The storehouses are emptied. The treasury is spent. The navy is divided. When the war ends, Majapahit is still standing, but it is hollow.
While the civil war bled the empire, a transformation was sweeping through its ports. Islam had been carried by Arab and Indian merchants for generations. Port cities found that converting to Islam gave them access to a vast Muslim trading network that stretched from Arabia to China. One by one the coastal kingdoms converted. One by one they drifted from Majapahit's orbit. The Malacca Sultanate rose on the Malay Peninsula and positioned itself as the new center of regional trade. It was Muslim. It had Chinese protection. It offered lower taxes than Majapahit. Merchants began redirecting their ships to Malacca. King Hayam Wuruk had warned against exactly this kind of complacency.
An empire built on trade must never stop being the best place to trade. The moment a merchant finds a better harbor, the empire loses more than a ship. It loses the idea that it is indispensable. We were indispensable, then we stopped being so.
The chronicler described the unraveling.
The vassals are leaving. Not all at once. Not in open rebellion. They simply stop sending tribute. They stop answering letters. They build mosques where temples stood. Each departure is polite. Each departure is permanent. An empire that loses its periphery eventually has no center.
Without trade revenue, the treasury emptied. Without the treasury, the army could not be paid. Without the army, the remaining vassals felt no obligation to stay. The empire entered a death spiral that no individual decision could reverse. It had been built on the intersection of trade routes. The trade routes were moving. The final blow came from Demak, a Muslim sultanate on Java's northern coast. In 1527, Demak forces marched on what remained of Majapahit. The last Hindu-Buddhist empire of Java fell not with a dramatic last stand but with a quiet surrender. The surviving members of the royal family and their priests fled east to Bali. They carried their faith, their art, and their culture with them. Bali remains Hindu today because of that exodus. The flight to Bali was not a defeat. It was a preservation. The priests carried the sacred texts. The artists carried the performing traditions. The architects carried the knowledge of temple building. Bali became the living museum of Majapahit civilization. When you visit Bali today and see the temples and the ceremonies and the offerings, you are seeing Majapahit as it was 600 years ago. When the court fled and the administration collapsed, Triulan was abandoned. The jungle moved in immediately. Southeast Asian jungle does not wait. Within decades, vines were pulling at the brick walls. Within a century, the canopy was closing over the temples. Within 2 centuries, the capital of the greatest empire in Southeast Asian history was invisible from 50 meters away. The chronicler described what the jungle did.
The jungle does not destroy. It absorbs. The bricks become part of the root system. The temple platforms become hills. The sacred ponds become swamps. In 100 years, a city becomes a forest. In 200 years, it becomes a myth. In 300 years, it becomes a question. Was it ever real?
European colonial scholars stumbling through Java in the 19th century found ruins they could not explain. Brick structures of massive scale. stone carvings of extraordinary sophistication. An entire lost civilization hiding under the jungle canopy of an island they thought they controlled. They had been ruling Java for 2 centuries without knowing what was underneath it. Today the site of Trailan is an active archaeological zone covering 50 square kilometers. Foundations of palaces, temples, water gates, and markets are still being uncovered. Every year the ground gives back more of what the jungle took. King Hayam Wuruk left words that explain why they built so carefully.
We did not build in stone because we wanted to last forever. We built in stone because we wanted to be worthy of forever. Whether we lasted is not something we could control. Whether we were worthy is the only question that matters.
Bali is the answer to the question of what happened to Majapahit. The answer is that it did not entirely disappear. It compressed itself into one island and kept going. The same temple ceremonies. The same sacred texts. The same gamelan music. The same wayang stories. Bali is Majapahit in miniature, preserved by the sea that separates it from Java. The national motto of Indonesia, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, meaning unity in diversity, comes from a poem written at the Majapahit court in the 14th century. The world's 4th most populous nation was founded on words written by a Majapahit poet. The empire is gone. Its words govern 300 million people. The chronicler noted the bitter irony.
The Portuguese arrived at the Maluku Islands in 1511, calling it the greatest discovery of the age. Majapahit had been taxing those islands for 200 years before Portugal was a country. The Europeans did not discover the Spice Islands. They found them after the people who had always known where they were had been removed.
Gamelan music, developed and refined under Majapahit patronage, is one of the world's great musical traditions. It influenced composers from Debussy to John Cage to Philip Glass. The tuning systems, the interlocking rhythmic patterns, the relationship between melody and rhythm, all of it developed in the courts of Majapahit and its predecessors. The music outlasted the empire by 6 centuries and is still going. The chronicler described the textile legacy.
Batik is UNESCO intangible cultural heritage today. The patterns that Majapahit weavers developed are still being used. International fashion designers study them. The cloth that dressed Majapahit nobles now dresses people on every continent. The craft survived the empire by finding new patrons in every generation.
Wayang shadow puppetry is still performed across Indonesia and Malaysia. The stories are the same stories that entertained Majapahit courts 6 centuries ago. The Mahabharata and Ramayana reinterpreted through a Javanese lens. The art form that Majapahit perfected is on the UNESCO list of intangible cultural heritage. It will outlive every government that has tried to regulate it. The temple architecture of Bali is Majapahit architecture adapted to volcanic island terrain. The multi-tiered Meru towers, the split gates called Candi Bentar, the sacred orientation toward the mountain, all carried to Bali by the refugees of 1527. King Hayam Wuruk understood why sacred buildings outlast political ones.
We built for the gods. The gods do not lose their temples when kings lose their thrones. The sacred is more durable than the political. We understood this. We built accordingly.
The concept of Indonesia as a unified archipelago nation is a Majapahit idea. The word Nusantara that Gajah Mada used in his oath is now the official name of Indonesia's new capital city being built in Borneo. A government planning a new capital in 2024 chose a 700-year-old word from a prime minister's oath as its name. The empire is gone. Its vocabulary governs the present. The chronicler described the religious legacy.
For million Balinese practice Agama, Hindu Dharma today. The same synthesis of Hindu, Buddhist, and animist traditions that Majapahit developed. The same sacred calendar, the same cremation ceremonies, the same offerings, the same sacred texts in Old Javanese. Majapahit did not die. It moved to an island and kept practicing.
The spice islands that Majapahit controlled are still the source of the world's nutmeg and cloves. The geography has not changed. The spices still grow where they grew when Gajah Mada was fighting to control them. The empires that controlled the spice trade after Majapahit, Portugal, the Netherlands, Britain, have all come and gone. The nutmeg trees are still there. They do not care about empires. They just grow. The fall of Majapahit was not a single event. It was a process that took over a century. Historians identify multiple causes that combined to bring down an empire that should have been one of the most durable in history. The chronicler named the first cause
The Peregrine Civil War of 1404 to 1406 broke the spine of the empire. It depleted the treasury. It divided the navy. It exhausted the army. Most critically, it destroyed the trust between the eastern and western elites that had held the empire together. An empire divided against itself invites every external pressure to become fatal.
Islam offered something Majapahit could not match: membership in a global community of traders. A Muslim merchant from Java could find credit, hospitality, and commercial partners in every port from Aden to Guangzhou simply by sharing a faith. Majapahit's Hindu-Buddhist identity, magnificent as it was geographically limited. Islam was everywhere. The vassals went where the trade went. The chronicler named the structural cause.
Majapahit was never a centralized empire in the way Rome or China was centralized. It was a network of relationships held together by the prestige of the center and the fear of its navy. When the Civil War damaged both the prestige and the navy, the relationships simply dissolved. There was no administrative machine to hold them in place.
Climate disruption in the 15th century brought droughts and harvest failures to Java. The agricultural surpluses that had funded Majapahit's army, navy, and cultural patronage disappeared. Hungry populations do not maintain empires. Hungry populations find new leaders who promise them food. Islam spreading through Java's north coast offered new trade networks, new opportunities, and new hope. Majapahit offered tradition and declining harvests. The court of Majapahit never adapted to the Islamic transformation sweeping its ports. The elite continued practicing their traditions with great sophistication while the commercial world around them converted. Gajah Mada had foreseen exactly this kind of danger.
I built this empire on the sea. The sea is always moving. An empire that stops moving with the sea does not sink slowly. It wakes up one morning and the sea is somewhere else entirely.
When the Portuguese arrived in 1511 and the Dutch followed in the late 16th century, they found not a single great empire to negotiate with or defeat but dozens of small competing sultanates and kingdoms. The fragmentation that destroyed Majapahit made Southeast Asia easy to colonize. If Majapahit had survived, the European age of colonialism in Southeast Asia might have looked very different. History pivots on the civil wars that should have been avoided. Modern Indonesia invokes Majapahit constantly. The concept of a unified archipelago nation governing thousands of islands and hundreds of ethnic groups across a vast sea is a Majapahit idea applied to a modern state. Indonesia's founding fathers studied Majapahit history deliberately. They were building a 20th century version of a 14th century vision. The chronicler described the archaeological legacy.
At Trowulan today, school children walk through the ruins of the capital their empire built. They touch the same bricks that Gajah Mada's builders laid. They stand in the same spaces where Hayam Wuruk received ambassadors from China. The empire is not abstract history to them. It is the ground under their feet.
Every year on Nyepi, the Balinese Day of Silence, the entire island of Bali goes dark. No lights. No movement. No noise. Not even the airport operates. An ancient tradition rooted in Majapahit religious practice shuts down a modern tourist economy for 24 hours every year. The living beats the economic every time. 600 years of tradition stronger than $6 billion of tourism revenue. Malaysia and Indonesia share a language, shared cultural traditions, and a shared heritage that traces back to Majapahit and its predecessors. King Hayam Wuruk understood the difference between political and cultural power.
Political unity is fragile. It depends on armies and agreements. Cultural unity is different. It lives in language. It lives in music. It lives in the way people cook their food and tell their stories. Political unity can be broken in a day. Cultural unity survives centuries.
The chronicler described the ultimate legacy.
6 million tourists a year go to Bali. They go to see the temples and the ceremonies and the offerings and the music. They do not know they are going to see Majapahit. They do not know that the island they call paradise is a refugee camp for a civilization that was displaced 600 years ago. They just know it is beautiful. It is beautiful because Majapahit made it beautiful. The empire disappeared. The beauty did not.
Gajah Mada is a national hero of Indonesia. There are universities named after him. Streets named after him. Military units named after him. A man who served as a prime minister 600 years ago has more statues in modern Indonesia than most of its actual presidents. The Palapa oath he swore in 1334 is cited in Indonesian political speeches today. He swore he would not eat spices until the archipelago was unified. Indonesia is unified. Somewhere, the Prime Minister is finally eating well. Java's volcanoes were here before Majapahit. They will be here long after every empire that claimed them. But for 2 centuries, a civilization built on these volcanic slopes and extended its reach to 10,000 islands across the most complex maritime geography on Earth. They did it without GPS, without steel ships, without gunpowder, and without writing in the European sense. They did it with rice, gold, spices, genius, and one prime minister's impossible oath. The chronicler touched the ancient bricks.
These bricks were laid by workers who were paid in rice and given shelter by a government that took labor instead of money. The workers are dust. The government is memory. The bricks are still here, still carrying the load they were placed to carry 600 years ago. That is Majapahit. Not the gold, not the spices, the bricks, the patient, careful, unremarkable work of ordinary people building something that lasted.
The archipelago that Gajah Mada swore to unify is unified today under the flag of Indonesia. Not by the same methods. Not by the same faith. Not by the same empire. But unified. The vision outlasted the man who had it by 600 years. The oath outlasted the empire that inspired it. Some ideas are so correct that even their failure cannot kill them. The chronicler spoke his final words.
The largest empire most people have never heard of controlled the spice trade that changed the world. Its prime minister swore an oath that became a nation's founding idea. Its refugees built the most beautiful island on Earth. Its music plays in concert halls from Tokyo to New York. Its words govern 300 million people. It is gone. It is everywhere. That is what happened to Majapahit.
The largest empire no one taught you about. The prime minister who swore not to eat spices until he conquered the world. The empire that hid in Bali and kept going. The words that govern 300 million people today were written in its courts. The music you hear when you close your eyes and think of paradise was made in its palaces. The spices that changed the world were grown in its islands. You have been living inside Majapahit your entire life. You just did not know its name. Now you do. Like and subscribe to Empires Untold.